It's a long walk to face the wrath of American justice for Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia.
For more than a decade, Nicolás Maduro stood at the helm of Venezuela, a nation once among Latin America's wealthiest, now battered by economic collapse, political repression, and mass migration. His presidency was defined by loyalty to the revolutionary legacy of Hugo Chávez, but also by controversy, isolation, and crisis. By the time his final days in power approached, Venezuela was no longer merely struggling, it was exhausted. Maduro's rise had once seemed improbable. A former bus driver and union organizer, he climbed through the ranks of Chávez's political movement, becoming foreign minister and eventually vice president. When Chávez died in 2013, Maduro inherited not only the presidency but also a fragile economic system entirely dependent on oil. That dependence would soon become the country's undoing. Oil prices collapsed, corruption scandals multiplied, state institutions weakened, inflation spiraled into one of the worst hyperinflation crises in modern history. Venezuelans watched their salaries become worthless in weeks, then days. Supermarket shelves emptied. Hospitals ran out of basic medicine. Electricity blackouts plunged entire cities into darkness for hours, sometimes days. Over time, more than 7 million Venezuelans left the country, seeking safety and opportunity in neighboring nations and beyond. Families were split across continents. Entire neighborhoods in Caracas seemed quieter, hollowed out by departure. Yet Maduro remained in power. He survived protests in 2014. He survived unrest in 2017. He survived an opposition movement that at one point claimed its own interim president. He survived international sanctions. He survived internal fractures within his own party. His strength lay in loyalty, particularly from the military and security apparatus. While the streets grew restless, the presidential palace remained heavily guarded. The intelligence services expanded. Political opponents were disqualified, arrested, or forced into exile. Courts aligned closely with executive authority. To his supporters, Maduro defended Venezuela's sovereignty against foreign interference. To his critics, he was presiding over authoritarian decline. By the early 2020s, elections had become flashpoints. The 2018 presidential vote was widely criticized internationally. Later electoral contests were contested again, with opposition leaders alleging unfair conditions and structural manipulation. Still, Maduro's government maintained that it operated within constitutional boundaries.
A former bus driver and trade unionist, Nicolás Maduro became the protege of revolutionary Hugo Chávez and was catapulted to the presidency when Chávez died in 2013. He was not long in office before protests erupted over runaway inflation and critical shortages of basic goods. Protests in which his government quickly gained a reputation as repressive. Indeed, the International Criminal Court opened an investigation into the regime in 2021 for alleged crimes against humanity, including torture and sexual violence. Millions of Venezuelans have left the country under his rule due to political and economic troubles. As, despite sitting on the world's largest oil reserves, the country's economic hardships continued and only worsened as international sanctions ramped up against his regime, deemed undemocratic by the US, Europe and much of Latin America, who declined to recognize both his 2018 and 2024 re-elections. Non-recognition he viewed as political interference.
I denounce the US government, which, along with Elon Musk and the international fascist Javier Milei, are leading attempts to destabilize our people and carry out a coup against Venezuelan democracy.
As his final year unfolded, the country felt tense, suspended between stagnation and potential rupture. Inside Miraflores Palace, security grew tighter. Travel routes were altered without notice. Public events were reduced or moved to controlled settings. Intelligence briefings reportedly focused less on economics and more on loyalty. Who could be trusted? Which commanders remained firm? Where might dissent emerge? The international landscape also shifted. The United States maintained sanctions targeting key officials and Venezuela's oil sector. The European Union applied its own pressure. Meanwhile, alliances with Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba provided economic lifelines and diplomatic backing. Maduro leaned heavily on the language of resistance. In speeches, he evoked Bolivar, Chavez, and anti-imperialist struggle. He framed sanctions as economic warfare and portrayed hardship as sacrifice for sovereignty. His base, though smaller than before, remained committed. But fatigue was undeniable. In working-class neighborhoods that once formed the heart of Chavismo, conversations became more complicated. Some still defended the revolution. Others quietly admitted disappointment. The government's social programs, once expansive, had shrunk under fiscal strain. Meanwhile, opposition leaders reorganized. Younger activists emerged alongside veterans who had spent years challenging Maduro's authority. Though fragmented at times, the opposition increasingly focused on institutional reform rather than immediate overthrow.
Political opposition that was once deeply divided. Machado was praised for trying to loosen the authoritarian government's rigid hold on power. She entered politics in 2002 as the founder of the vote monitoring group Somate. Machado was one of hundreds of candidates nominated for the award. And for more on the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, we are joined now by DW's Oscar Schlenker. So, Oscar, tell us, what more do we know about her?
Well, Maria Corina Machado is a real symbol of resistance in Venezuela and of peaceful resistance through promoting democracy, standing up for her beliefs, and peaceful protests that she has led. She's not a newcomer to politics, although she's studied industrial engineering. She decided to take on one of the toughest fights in Latin America, challenging authoritarian power that is Chavismo without violence.
In Maduro's final months in power, rumors multiplied. There were whispers of back-channel negotiations, reports of quiet talks between government intermediaries and foreign diplomats, speculation about guarantees, about what a transition might look like, and whether safe exit options were being discussed. Maduro publicly dismissed such claims. But the tension was visible. Televised addresses grew sharper in tone. References to betrayal became more frequent. He praised military commanders by name, emphasizing unity. He warned of destabilization attempts. Outside Venezuela, debates intensified. Should sanctions be tightened or relaxed? Did pressure strengthen the opposition or entrench the regime? Could negotiated reform work, or was the political system too rigid? Inside Venezuela, ordinary citizens worried less about geopolitics and more about survival. Prices fluctuated unpredictably. Public transportation faltered. Schools struggled with resources. The exodus continued. Then came the turning point. A controversial political development, whether an electoral dispute, a high-profile corruption case, or an unexpected military reshuffle, ignited new protests in Caracas and other cities. Demonstrations were not as massive as those of earlier years, but they carried a different energy, less explosive, more resolute. Security forces responded with familiar tactics, barricades, dispersal operations, detentions. Yet something felt different. International media coverage surged. Regional governments issued urgent statements. Diplomatic channels buzzed. Within the presidential palace, advisors reportedly split into camps. Some urged firmness, absolute control, immediate crackdown, zero concession. Others quietly suggested controlled reform, perhaps even partial power sharing, to stabilize the situation. Maduro, known for projecting unwavering resolve, faced the most difficult calculation of his political life. For years, he had framed compromise as surrender. But the pressure was mounting on multiple fronts: economic stagnation, diplomatic isolation, and an increasingly skeptical population.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro says he is open to talks with President Trump on a number of pressing issues, including drug trafficking, oil, and migration. In a pre-taped interview that aired on Thursday, Maduro said he is prepared to open a dialogue with the U.S., quote, whenever they want to, whenever they want. Now, this comes as President Trump and the administration now escalates its pressure campaign against Venezuela, with the U.S. military announcing it killed 5 people in strikes on 2 suspected drug boats as recently as 2 days ago.
The year of the horse, if we're riding. The perfect union has emerged. Tested at all times, always victorious, and at full speed.
Just a day before U.S. strikes rocked Venezuela and Nicolás Maduro was captured by American forces, China's top envoy to the region was meeting him face-to-face in Caracas. That meeting, held Friday at Miraflores Palace, is now believed to be Maduro's final engagement as Venezuela's president. Leading the Chinese delegation was Qi Shaoqi, Beijing's special representative for Latin American and Caribbean affairs, joined by China's ambassador to Venezuela and senior officials.
After more than a decade in power, Maduro was no longer president. The immediate aftermath was uncertain. Financial markets reacted cautiously. Oil analysts speculated about policy shifts. On January 3, 2026, an extraordinary and controversial U.S. military operation unfolded in the early morning hours in Caracas and surrounding areas. In a surprise strike involving special forces and coordinated actions against key military sites, Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were taken into custody by U.S. personnel and removed from Venezuela. According to official accounts, the operation targeted Maduro's residence at the military complex of Fuerte Tiuna, where he and Celia Flores were captured. Within hours, they were flown out of the country by U.S. forces, part of what the U.S. government described as a law enforcement action tied to long-standing criminal indictments. The strikes and capture marked an unprecedented moment. In the early hours of that day, President Donald Trump publicly announced that U.S. forces had seized Maduro and were in charge of the situation, emphasizing that Maduro would face justice in the United States.
It's a long walk to face the wrath of American justice for Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia. Dressed in matching tan prison uniforms, they're led in handcuffs from a chopper, headed to their first court appearance, surrounded by heavily armed federal agents. It was an all-hands-on-deck operation, getting the captured first couple of Venezuela from a detention center in Brooklyn to federal court in Manhattan. The early morning odyssey began with the Maduroses loaded into an armored truck, then transferred to an SUV, then to a helicopter for the brief flight to Lower Manhattan. Another armored truck transported them to the federal courthouse for their arraignment. Security is intense. A ring of steel surrounds the courthouse, where protesters have gathered demanding Maduro be released. Stephen Fabian is there.
In an extraordinary hearing,
Maduro and Flores were taken to the United States and processed into federal custody in New York City. They appeared in a federal courthouse in Manhattan just days later, where both pleaded not guilty to the charges leveled against them. Maduro, defiant in court, insisted he was still Venezuela's rightful president and described his capture as illegitimate, even referring to himself as a prisoner of war. The charges brought against them were related to narco-terrorism, cocaine smuggling, and weapons offenses. U.S. prosecutors claim Maduro had collaborated with international criminal networks and used the Venezuelan state apparatus to facilitate drug trafficking into the United States. Flores, a longtime political figure and former high-ranking official, was also indicted alongside him. News of the arrest reverberated far beyond the courtroom.
Maduro faced charges of drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, and conspiracy to import cocaine. He told the judge he had been kidnapped. The judge asked, "Are you Nicolás Maduro Moros?" A defiant Maduro responded in Spanish, "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas." The judge cut him off. "There will be time and place to get into all of this." Asked for his plea, Maduro said, "I'm innocent. I'm not guilty. I am a decent man." Then the judge turned to Maduro's wife and asked for her plea. "Not guilty, completely innocent," she said.
After court, it was back to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a facility notorious for its conditions and violence. It's known as hell on earth and home, if you can call it that, to many accused high-profile detainees.
Venezuela's military, publicly called for Maduro's immediate release and demanded that all U.S. sanctions be lifted. Many Venezuelans loyal to Maduro took to the streets to protest what they saw as an unlawful seizure and violation of their nation's sovereignty. International reactions were sharply divided. Countries such as Nicaragua brought the issue before the United Nations, demanding Maduro and his wife's immediate liberation and accusing the U.S. of breaching international law and the UN Charter's principles on sovereignty and non-interference. At home in the United States, the legal battle surrounding former Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro quickly became complex and highly contentious. His defense team argued that U.S. authorities had violated his constitutional rights during the proceedings. One of the key disputes emerged when Washington briefly blocked the Venezuelan government from paying Maduro's legal fees due to sanctions concerns before later reversing the decision. His lawyers filed several motions requesting the dismissal of the case, claiming that the restrictions interfered with his right to legal representation and undermined his ability to mount a proper defense. Meanwhile, Maduro maintained his innocence and pleaded not guilty to charges connected to narcotics trafficking and related criminal allegations. While the courtroom battle unfolded in the United States, the political landscape in Venezuela changed almost immediately. Following Maduro's removal, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as interim president after the country's Supreme Tribunal of Justice ruled that she should temporarily assume leadership to maintain state continuity. The decision, however, sparked intense debate both inside Venezuela and internationally, with critics questioning the legality and legitimacy of the succession process. With Maduro suddenly absent from power and facing trial abroad, the country entered a period of rapid political and economic recalibration. Analysts noted that the new interim administration was forced to focus heavily on stabilizing Venezuela's fragile economy while also navigating growing international pressure. Policy discussions increasingly revolved around economic reform, attracting foreign investment, and restructuring key industries such as mining and energy as the government sought to rebuild confidence and address years of economic instability. 2 months after Maduro's arrest, Venezuelan society remained deeply divided. Supporters of Maduro and the broader Bolivarian movement continued organizing demonstrations and rallies across the country, demanding his release and condemning what they described as foreign interference in Venezuela's sovereignty. At the same time, many critics of his government, including members of the Venezuelan diaspora, viewed the legal process in the United States as a long-awaited moment of accountability for alleged corruption and illicit activities during his presidency. As the trial progressed and the interim government attempted to reshape the country's political and economic direction, Venezuela remained caught between competing narratives, one portraying Maduro as a victim of international intervention and another framing his prosecution as a necessary step toward justice and political transformation.
By international law and the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and cease infringing upon the sovereignty and security of other countries.
President Trump's envoy to the UN said the US was entirely justified in its actions.
There is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades.
So is Nicolás Maduro simply a wanted criminal who was legally arrested by the United States, or an example of the lengths President Trump will go to assert his will in what he views as America's backyard? This image, posted online by the administration today, would seem to answer that question. This is our hemisphere, said the accompanying text, and President Trump will not allow our security to be threatened.
In the end, the case became more than just a legal battle over Nicolás Maduro's actions. It evolved into a defining moment for Venezuela's political future and its relationship with the international community. As the trial moved forward and the country adjusted to new leadership, the outcome would not only determine Maduro's fate, but also shape Venezuela's path towards stability, accountability, and possible political transformation.